Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. A Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges, spirituality, ADHD, or maybe just family, travel, and logistics. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison, with your mystery meat sandwich.
Greetings, compadres. Welcome back to another episode of Eternally Amy. Here's the deal. I'm just going to jump right in to the chaplain's chat. I'm not giving you a mystery meat sandwich today. I just am so excited about this that we're just going for it. And so sorry, but the opposite of that. So not sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Right.
Okay. So today with me, I'm so excited to introduce Duane Osterlind. And he is the host of the Addicted Mind podcast. And he is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a sexual addiction therapist supervisor. As co-founder of Novus Mindful Life Institute and the Helping Couples Heal programs, Duane's vision is to end the stigma of addiction and mental health treatment and bring compassionate and actionable solutions, which I love, to people who are suffering addiction's impact. Duane has over a decade of experience as a therapist helping individuals find hope and healing. He also is trained with Patrick Carnes, PhD, a leading expert in treating sexual addiction, and Stan Tatkin, founder of the psychobiological approach to couples therapy. Duane has served on the Virginia Satir Global Network Board, which focuses on creating healthy and just relationships based on the teachings of Virginia Satir. He's the host and creator of the top-rated Addicted Mind podcast, as I mentioned, and he's dedicated to ending that stigma and discussing its treatments, and also co-hosts a second podcast, called Helping Couples Heal with Marnie Briekner. And so, Duane, it's an honor to have you here today. And I know you have a vast amount of knowledge and wisdom and intelligence. I'm almost blown away by all of the things that I just read. And just in talking to you before we hit record, I was just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do and anything about your background that you'd like to share.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me on, Amy. I mean, it's an honor too. I love doing this kind of work and talking to other podcasters who are out there advocating for mental health and trying to help everybody, be their best selves. So I appreciate coming on. So a little bit about me. Like you said, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I think I have to update that bio. It's almost been 20 years of working as a therapist and working in the mental health field and doing this. And I'm just passionate about it. Addiction impacted me early in my life. I actually ended up in a rehab when I was 17 years old, mainly for depression, suicidality, anxiety. Didn't really know how to cope. I feel I was one of the lucky people out there that I was able to get help, and I had a supportive network around me to help me through that experience. But that's one experience that really impacted my life and made me passionate about this, because it's with that help that I didn't go down another road that I could have gone down, and I could really see if I hadn't had that support. I think for me, for a long time, alcohol and drugs would have been a solution for me. But because I was able to get support early, especially at that age of brain development, you're 17, I was able to get a lot of the skills I needed to cope with those issues. And then, move through my life, in a more healthy and happier way. But also, I guess it gives me the insight to what it's like to be in that. in that kind of darkness of mental health, and to understand like what it's like to be in that kind of psychological pain. So
Hmm.
I think that informs a lot of my passion in the beginning of doing this work, and then other issues through my life, which we can get to later, also impacted that process. So um, yeah, I think that's a little about me, and
Hmm.
why I do this work. And I love helping people. I like seeing people happy, and getting rid of their suffering, or moving through their suffering and finding something meaningful on the other side of it.
Mm. So that must have been an amazing experience, just sidebar, to be so young in a rehab facility. And what was that like for you? Just curious to know. Did you feel kind of out of place? Did you identify immediately?
Yeah, I think when I look back at it now, at the time, it was just out of desperation.
Yeah.
I was a very depressed teenager, going through a lot of teenage angst, I guess, and it was a very, very dark time. And I always described it as like, it felt like I was in a pit that I couldn't
Mhm.
get out of. Like it was like a mud pit, and you reach up with your hands trying to grab something to get out, and you just can't, right? And
Mm.
you get stuck there. And so, and then the way I was coping with that a lot was just drinking excessively to just just numb out from it, right?
Yep.
And not having the skills, or not having that. So I went to this rehab, and it was like a residential. So it was like for 3 weeks. So it wasn't long, but for a 17-year-old, that was a big deal. And just really started to get the support and people there that could validate my experience, and then teach me skills that I just didn't have. I didn't know how to get out. And so it shifted the direction. It got me away from alcohol as a coping mechanism at that time. I think I feel really, really lucky. I feel like if I grew up in this day and age, especially with the opioid crisis, I could see myself there. And so I sometimes like am really, really thankful. That would have been so appealing to me when I was in that pain, um, to just want out, right? So this place gave me the skills, and I'm just appreciative of everybody there who walked me through that process. And then, as life went on, you get a little older. I was able to, alcohol didn't become a big deal for me after that, right? I was sober for a while. I think I got the brain development, the brain maturity, was able to grow through all of that process without that in my brain. That alcohol, and now in my life, is not really an issue, but definitely have the knowledge, the understanding of that experience. And I think that experience informs a lot of my decision making of how I look at life and how I go through, and wanting to help others.
So fantastic. And I know exactly what you mean when you're talking about the whole idea of the escapism is just, it's huge for me, especially as a parent, to talk to my kids about that and how, life isn't like, woo, the straight trajectory of good times. And I think that I thought growing up, you're supposed to be happy all the time, especially because
Right, right, yeah.
in the church, and so there was a lot that came with that. But um, the whole idea, I love that you mentioned tools because I think just the idea of like, you know what? No, it's okay not to feel okay, first and foremost. But secondly, let's give you some things to do that actually are going to be productive, you know? And
Yeah.
that's huge. That's huge.
And I think that's why I like the actionable items, like
Yeah.
you can actually do behaviors. I'm a big fan of dialectical behavior therapy, which is a type of therapy that really looks at the skills you can use, practical skills that you can use when you're feeling overwhelming emotions, right? When you're feeling um, dysregulated, right?
Mhm.
You can do mindfulness exercises. You can look at how your thinking patterns um, amplify that emotion, or or increase it, or even decrease positive emotions that you want more of, more joy or more happiness. There's a lot of things we can do that actually pull those feelings away from us. And the reality is we're wired for negative emotions, so we want to pay attention to negative emotions. Our body just does. That's just the way we are. So we have to really work to pay attention to the positive things in our life as well. And so yeah, I love actionable stuff that we can move forward with, that we can take action on, we can do something.
Just love that. The negativity thing is, I know, huge for, at least for the addicts who I know, and for myself, that's been huge. And I'm just curious to know, like, if you were to pick one thing that kind of helps with that, because I know they've said, that the brain is kind of like Teflon. When you hear positive things, it just kind of it floats right off, right? And it's supposed to take like 10 positive things or something, probably the wrong number, but before you really latch onto it. But a negative thing will scar you forever,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think if I could do one thing, right? And if I would suggest one skill, I think it would be to create a practice around mindfulness work, right?
So good.
Mindfulness is a foundational piece that we can put tools on top of, right? Because when we're mindful, right? And when we practice when we practice mindfulness, we enter a space of non-judgmental awareness,
Mhm.
right? So we can start to watch what is happening around us. And then if we have that pause, that space, then we can pull in these skills to change our behavior,
Mhm.
right? Instead of just reacting to something and we have this feeling and it comes up to us, we just react. And then usually those reactions aren't very strategic and they just make things worse, right? So
Yeah.
if we have mindfulness, we can sit, we can watch what our feelings are, we can watch the environment without reacting to it, we can start to respond. And then we can use strategic behaviors that actually help us get our goals,
Mhm.
right? Drive us in the direction we want to go,
Mhm.
right? Build the relationships we want to build, create the things we want to create. And so, yeah, mindfulness, it seems like a foundation for me of
Mhm.
mental health. So I love it. I practice mindfulness and I enjoy it. Sometimes I'm more active in it than other times, but I always feel I'm always coming back to that as a base, right?
Mhm.
If that was the one thing I would say to start on, you can build on mindfulness. There's so many resources out there for mindfulness now. There's great apps on your phone. There's websites dedicated to mindfulness. There's courses on mindfulness. You can get great books on mindfulness. It's all there. I think the
Mhm.
hardest part is just starting that process of doing it 5 minutes a day and just getting into the
Mhm.
habit of doing it,
That's
right?
huge,
Which
right?
is another roadblock, you gotta work on and get over, but there's strategies that can help you with that as well.
Mhm. So good. So good. And right on, because that actually is something that is productive, right? Mindfulness is like, you know, I've never heard anybody say, I regret starting a mindfulness program.
Right.
It just
Right.
never happens. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to know the spectrum of addictions, right? I mean, here's what I experienced in my alcohol addiction was I had convinced myself that I was only harming myself. And so being that the family unit on the whole is probably or relationships, marriage relationships, is, something that you deal with. How how, I guess, likely is it that addictions, no matter what it is, affects the family unit on the whole? Or is it kind of one of those things that's sort of addiction specific?
Well, I think that, this is the tragedy of addiction is that yes, it impacts the individual who's there, but it impacts everybody who loves them or cares about them. Because, I mean, if you're engaging in an addiction, you're hiding from yourself in a way. And if you're hiding from yourself, you can't have those enriching relationships with the people around you, right? So they're robbed of that, despite like all of the deeper consequences. If you're drinking and driving and you get arrested, I mean, that just impacts, that's financial impact. if you're, one of the specialties that I work in is we work in sex addiction, and specifically with my colleague Marnie Breeker and the Helping Couples Heal podcast, we deal with specifically betrayal from sexual addiction to
Mhm.
coupleships, and that can be devastating for partners who experience that. So I think addiction is not just about the person; it's about everyone, and
Mhm.
that we all need to help this process. We all, in many ways, contribute to it. And
Mhm.
then in many ways, we can contribute to the healing of it. A person
Mhm.
who's not struggling with addiction can work to understand what addiction is like for the person who's struggling, and how they can support them to get better. And in turn, that person's going to help them. So in a way, creating a positive feedback loop out of all of that negativity. But addiction is it's just so destructive all around for everybody. Children are impacted when a parent isn't emotionally available because they're drinking. I mean,
Yeah.
it just breaks my heart. You see it, and it's just like, especially working in this field and like what we're doing and talking to people, we know the experience. We see the destruction of it, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's part of my passion is if we can end some of that, we're not just helping the person who's struggling with addiction, we're it radiates out to everyone around them. I know, like, when I work with people and the person who, is in the addiction, they come in, they're working on themselves, and they really do the work and they dig in, right? You begin to just see that radiate out to all of the other family members,
Mm.
right? Because now they're responding differently. They're responding in healthy ways. And then that often motivates these other family members to get some support or some help as well. And then they grow. And then you have these families that are just they have these meaningful relationships that they even never had before, because when
Mhm.
you're in recovery and you're doing the work, you have to talk about these things. You have to jump into this stuff. You can't not do the work. Yeah, you have to do it. And it just, yeah, it radiates out to everybody else. And you just get to see it. And I love seeing that. That's what I think keeps me motivated to do this work.
Mm.
Right. It's like you see that and you're like, wow, that's amazing. Like, these people are having such deep relationships is great. It gives me hope for all of us. It gives me hope for myself too, as because we're all human, so we're all working on our stuff, right? And
Yep.
so, watching other people heal, even if I'm in the process of helping them heal, helps me heal. It's a positive loop.
It is amazing, right? And I think too, at least in my experience, it feels like harm reduction is kind of the best I can expect from myself as a parent.
Yeah.
I'm never going to do things perfectly. And I think that, the generational, um, I don't know if curse is the right word, but the whole idea of me trying to do things maybe a little bit differently than my parents did things, who did things a little bit
Yeah.
differently than their parents did things. And so I often tell my guys, I know I'm going to hurt you in some way. I already have, right? But like, it's that whole idea of I want to be approachable and I want to continue to grow and learn. And so help me, understand more of who you
Yeah.
are so that I can meet your needs and hear what, you're coming from. And it's just all fascinating because it's an opportunity, right? To,
Yeah.
um, you know, help foster positive contributors to society with all this going on. Um, just how important that is. And also to create a safe space and just go, you know what, that hole in our soul that you might be trying to fill with other things, I'll stand by you, I'll walk with you. Like we're together
Yeah.
on this path. And I understand, and just to be able to find that common loop and do things that our parents' generation had a tough time with, like apologizing,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Absolutely. That intergenerational trauma that we just, you know, we, I, I have hope because, it's kind of crazy. The world seems kind of crazy right now, but when we really look at it, we've come a long way as human beings, and I think we're getting better and better. When you start to really look at it, yes, there's a lot of tragedy out there. Yes, there's a lot of hurt and pain, and I don't want to ignore that or minimize that in any way. But there are also a lot of good things that are happening. Like your podcast and putting this out there. The mental health field never had this opportunity to have all of these voices
Mm,
advocating for mental health, talking about mental health, normalizing what it means to be a human being walking through this world with the
mm,
ups and downs. I mean, as we share our voices, right? We acknowledge it for someone else. And I love that. And that gives me a lot of hope. I
yeah.
say one of the sayings I have is that we heal through the eyes of others,
Mm,
right? As human beings back and forth, we can mirror that compassion back and forth to each other, especially when if we're in a dark space, we can't offer ourselves compassion, right? We can't
mhm.
offer ourselves
Yeah.
that kind spirit or that kind heart. Sometimes that other person can give that to us. I think that's one of the things that really resonated with me back when I was, in that really dark space, 17-year-old kid, not knowing how to get out of this, thinking it was hopeless, right?
Mhm,
Thinking that nothing could change, thinking that it was just dark and this was it,
mhm,
right? Some people coming along and offering me a kind look or a kind gesture saying, you know what, you're not alone here.
mhm.
You're you're you're
You
you're not by yourself. And it's like it just made me, as I look through this, with a little bit more life wisdom, and a little bit more time, being able to see like it was those eyes, those people that walked me through that process, right?
mhm,
And it's like inspires me to walk other people through that. And I've had more experiences in my life where that has been critical and
mm.
important.
And speaking of tragedies, you have a very unique story in that you have a lot of personal experience with grief and loss. I'm wondering if you would feel comfortable sharing however much you would like to share about that.
Sure, definitely. Gosh, I think it would have been like 14 years ago now. Me and my wife, we were just starting to start a family, and we had our first child. And Audrey came just a little bit early, right? Just not too early, not super super early, but like right right in the middle there. And she didn't make it, right? So we lost her first. She was with us for about a week. She lived with us for about a week, and then she couldn't quite make it. And she was born at a time when in the brain development of the infant, there's this time when the two hemispheres of the brain are coming together, and they're forming these capillaries, right, that are very, very sensitive. So when she was born early, that put a lot of stress on that brain. And so unfortunately, her 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 brain couldn't quite make it
Mm,
due to the impact of that. And so um we had to say goodbye to her. And that was, I think, probably the hardest, most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. And was to walk through that. And my wife too. And yeah, that took a long time to walk through, but I think it's given me the ability to see what deep grief and
mm,
loss really is when you have an infant loss. And a lot of people don't want to talk about it, right? They,
mhm,
they don't know what to say. How do you talk to a parent who's just lost their week-year-old child? It's so hard,
mm,
And of course, both me and my wife at the time were just in shock. I mean,
mm,
you don't think about all the little things that go along. You're thinking you're having a child, and now you're walking out of the hospital with no child, right? And how do you do that, right? How do you walk through that?
mm,
And it's just all these little things that come with infant loss, and so yeah, I like to give a voice to that because
mm,
it's so hard, and it's so hard to talk about, right? But going back to that statement, what I was saying earlier about living through the eyes of others, right? There
mm,
was a chaplain. Her name was Sharon.
mhm,
And what was amazing about that is this is all that she worked with. She worked with parents who were going through the loss of a child, right? I don't know how anybody does that. She is a magical person. And so she was there for us. I didn't know how much we needed her in
Mm.
that moment, someone there to walk with us through this process, whatever you want to call it. And what she did too is she had a support group for other parents who were going through the same thing, right? So here we are with these other parents who have all lost their children or their infants, right? You know, some to SIDS, some to just all different kind of medical issues, right? And you know, it was really through that group of people that I think we survived this. I feel once again, you know, I said earlier, I feel so blessed that I had support when I was there in that darkness of depression. And I feel so blessed that I had support going through this loss. I don't know if we could have done it, right? But with these other people, we walked through that grief together for a couple years of just figuring it out, you know.
I mean,
And
I can only imagine, you know, you've set up a crib, you've got
yeah.
diapers at home,
Hmm.
and you've had baby showers. And I just can't, I mean, I can't fathom it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
um,
and you know, no one sees that part of it where you have to take the crib apart,
yeah.
put it away. Yeah.
And to be connected to that support group. I mean, I'm a huge believer that connection is the opposite of addiction. And not that I'm not trying to say you were addicted during that time or anything, but just when we're in those vulnerable places, I think sometimes you just have that feeling like the rug has totally been pulled out from underneath you, and
Yeah.
you can't imagine it coming back because it's got that vortex feel to it, you know, like,
Yeah, I don't think, you know, for both me and my wife, I mean, that year of that loss is kind of like I don't remember a lot of that year. You know, it's just I think we just survived and we just made it through and we kind of went into this cocoon with these other couples and we all just walked through this together. And I'm so thankful to that chaplain
mm,
because if she hadn't done that, I don't know where we would have been. And so once again, it's like it's just, you know, this is hindsight and you know, I've had time to work through the grief and actually you know what I say to a lot of people who have like deep grief, and we can have deep grief about all things, you know, all different kinds of things. You know, one of the things with addiction is there's a lot of grief about all the losses. When someone gets sober and they start to repair their life, they have to grieve all of that loss. Maybe they have to grieve relationships that they ended because of their addiction and et cetera, or all of that kind of stuff. You know, walking through that grief is really learning how to make friends with that grief. You know, I say that grief for me now is still here. I don't think it will ever go away, but it I don't want it to go away, if that makes sense, because it informs me of what is so important to me in this life. You know, the relationships I have, the people I know. You know, me and my wife have been blessed with two other wonderful children, and it's so amazing to walk through that. But I have such a deep appreciation of it because um, Audrey, our daughter, taught me how fragile our lives are.
mm,
You know,
yeah,
and how, you know, it was her gift, and so to us it was like it's informed my life in the sense of how I want to live it.
mhm, mm,
And you know, so going back to making friends with that grief, it's like being able to welcome that grief in to my life and let it inform my decisions
mhm,
because
mhm.
it's telling me something, right? Now, I want to say that didn't happen overnight, and I don't want to
Sure.
pretend that I just, you know, I had to walk to that process, you know, over years,
Yeah,
right? Of
yeah.
going through it and experiencing. But I realized I couldn't, you know, you want to kind of fight it, you want to
Mhm,
get rid of pain, but in some ways you have to welcome it in and listen to what it's
Mhm.
telling us, and telling me. And it informed a lot of my decision making, like I said later, about what's meaningful in this life.
Mhm. When
And
you got to that point, when you were able to start making friends with the grief, did you look at it as an opportunity for you to maybe walk alongside other people who might go through this someday? You hear that story like the Amber Alert or whatever, and she's
hmm
like the reason why there is an Amber Alert, and how foundations are set up when people lose a child. And um, did you have any of that? I have to do this, or what was it just kind of something that organically over time became a part of your life and then encompassed with some of your personal background? How did that all come about? That's not really a question. It's more of a like jumbled, messy statement that I'm wondering about.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I mean, in a way, it's like, what did I do with this, right? What do you do with this grief? And
Yeah.
I think, um, in the beginning, you're over time definitely called to help other people. I think that's why, you know, I'm sharing this now. I mean, it's been 14 years and I don't talk about this often, or it is on my website. I don't shy away from it, but I'm much more open about talking about it because so many parents out there who go through this, it's a very lonely experience
Mm,
because even though, everybody around you knows what's happening, right?
mhm,
But there's so much to it that you're so alone in it because as parents, and I especially think as a mom, you've developed this relationship with your child, and but not a lot of other people have,
mhm,
right? Because they're just, maybe they're just a year old, or maybe they're stillborn, or so no one got to meet them, or very few people got to meet them. So you're kind of in this your own world of pain and suffering around that.
mhm.
And so sharing that story, I want other parents to know that they can walk through this, although it's so hard and difficult. Give yourself time, give yourself grace.
Mhm.
I think part of me, and maybe this is just part of my personality, is like I just felt like I called that, Audrey didn't get the life, right? And I
Mhm.
have a responsibility to honor that as best I can,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
she didn't get it, but
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Mhm.
So I don't know if
That's
that
powerful.
roundabout to that answer.
No,
I
no,
don't know
no.
if
Well,
that's
it's a roundabout quote question, unquote. Um, and I don't the times when I've gone through my own grief in life, I I feel this almost I'm compelled when people will come up to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that this happened," or whatever. I almost feel inside like I have to make them feel better. And so that I found very difficult to do because it's like, hey, like my world is shattered over here. And P.S., why am I trying to make you feel better? Like, I can't do that. I don't have the bandwidth for that. And so I'm curious to know, do you relate to that at all? And if two-parter, and if so, what is maybe something that people can say in a situation like this if their best friend or their relative loses a child? What is something, instead of thoughts and prayers?
What can people say? Um, that's so hard. I think, when I can only go from my own experience, it was really for me, what was meaningful to me was when people acknowledged it, but then also gave me the space,
Yeah.
right? Saying, I'm sorry, sorry for your loss. I don't know if that's the right thing, but it's like I know that you're going through this, and
Mhm.
let me know if you need support or how I can support you. And checking in and just saying, hey, I'm thinking about you.
Mhm.
Sometimes it feels, going back to your earlier part, it's so overwhelming for many people that I just couldn't give support to anybody else,
No.
and I just had to kind of really let go of that piece of it. Like it was
Yeah.
And some people, and I think they're very gracious now. We kind of just had to tune everybody out for a while,
Yeah.
because we just couldn't really function. And so yeah, we had our core group, like I talked about before. We just spent a lot of time with them as we all walked through it together, because it was very okay to be upset or sad in the moment if you wanted to. Everybody understood what you were going through.
Mhm.
But I think going back to your first part of that, which is, how do you protect yourself and not go rescuing other people when you're in your own pain? And I think, that was a balancing act of learning, like, you know, being compassionate to
Mhm.
someone's pain without being drawn in to fix it for them.
Mhm.
So being compassionate and supportive, but also being able to separate yourself from it,
Mhm.
and that this is their pain that they're
Mhm.
going through. And so learning that as a skill, once you get going all the way back to mindfulness, it's like
Right.
going back and being aware of what's going on in my body. The urge to, like, I feel like I have to fix this person, but is this really my problem?
Right.
And being
Yeah.
yeah, but you can be compassionate at the same time,
Right.
but being able to draw that line. And I also think, as a professional therapist working with people and individuals, I think that's also a skill set that I've developed over time as well, because I am, part of my personality through all of this, as I think probably comes through, is I want to help people. I love helping people. It's my passion. And at the same time, I have to make sure that I help myself and care for myself. And
Yeah.
that's always a balancing act that we're
Right.
always looking at. So yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know if that answered your questions. And
No,
it's so
absolutely.
hard to say what to say to a parent who's grieving. I think just being there and just saying, hey, I see your pain, and I don't know if I totally understand, but I'm thinking of you.
Yeah.
And
Love
if you
it.
need support, reach out.
'Cause sometimes too, people want to rush in and bring meals and do all this stuff. And it's sort of like, just I just need to not, I just need to
Yeah.
not, I can't,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that's huge. I think it's important. The whole just, I love you, I'm here for you, I support you, whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I'm pulling that out of wherever, but that's powerful stuff. And thank you for feeling like you could share that. I'm sure that's going to help so many people, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity and to do it, and to put it
Yeah,
out there. I mean, a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about it, don't know how to talk about it. It's
right.
kind of scary to talk about, and because
Sure.
it's so overwhelming, and it's I think it's one of the biggest tragedies in life is to lose your own child. And if
Yeah.
you're a parent, it's like you understand that.
And
Uh,
it's like one of the biggest fears, right, for a parent.
yeah.
And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of uncomfortable topics, I do have a couple sex addiction questions for you.
Sure, we can go
Woo!
into that as well. We're going to completely go on to a different topic. That's yeah, totally.
Sorry, I have ADHD, you probably can tell, and I just kind of like, "Whoa, now what about this? Whoa, now this." Um, but okay, so basically what I'm wondering about sex addiction is root causes. They say like for alcoholism/substance use disorder, and this is the only thing that I can sort of relate it to, right? Because it's my experience, but that it's a real core like loneliness and a real core, set of fears, right? Fear that I'm not going to get what I think I need or want, or that I'm going to lose something that I have. And, all of these things start impacting, the alcoholic to the point where it seems like, well, a good solution, right, is to just drink it away and escape it, which of course, as if you have experience with this, it's like, that doesn't do anything but create more problems. It just sort of multiplies. And I'm wondering what are kind of the root causes of sex addiction? Are they similar, different?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. I mean, I think all addictions generally are the same in the sense of, like, I'm escaping some emotional pain, usually going really back to that core of I am not worthy to be part of this world,
Mhm.
and I am alone in it, and I have no way to sit with that, right? I have
Mhm.
no way to be there with it. Now, what may be a little bit different about sex addiction, or maybe not that different, is like, for all of our brains are different, right? So that's why you have certain people who use certain kinds of drugs. It hits them in a way that works for their brain and their body to alleviate whatever kind of pain they're having, whatever trauma that is. And for a lot of people who struggle with sex addiction, sex sex came on at a time that they found sex as a way to mitigate that pain. If you're in sexual arousal, or, you're, it's not just sex itself, right? Like the act of sex, right? Or even orgasm. A lot of times it's about all the anticipation of that.
Mm.
Because when you're in that state, in that body state, you're no longer feeling pain, right? You're aroused. Your body's in a different state. It's pleasurable. It keeps you from that. So a person has learned that, what, I can use sex as a tool to not have to feel any of this stuff.
Mm.
Yet it becomes the primary way in which they cope,
Yeah.
right? So they cope with all of their emotions just through arousal, right? Sexual arousal. And then, of course, as we know with addiction, right? They're all the consequences start to come with that,
Mhm.
right? They're betraying their partner maybe because they're keeping it all secret, so their partner doesn't know, so they're not having a honest relationship with their partner. Maybe their work is suffering because they're up all night looking at pornography, or maybe they're betraying their own value system and struggling with sexual behavior that doesn't fit, that may be based out of trauma, right? So then all the consequences start to mount up. And then, once again, you get into that other dynamic of the efforts to stop it, right? So then they start trying to stop it and they make all these deals. I'm never going to do it. This is the last time. Never going to do it. I won't do it at work. And then, of course, those all fail over time. So you have that that kind of, when we look at it, that trifecta of it's a primary way of coping, right, with pain, um, failed efforts to stop
Mhm.
behavior, right? And then continuing despite consequences,
Yep. Yep.
right? It's like those three those three
Yeah.
things there. So it's just
That's
it's
well
really
said.
just like all of the other addictions in that it just happens to be sex. And you can look
Sure.
at that as another behavior addiction like gambling. People get into gambling because it's not the it's the high of the gamble, but it's also the high, what we call the windfall fantasy, right?
Mm. Right.
Oh, it's that fantasy. If I win this, right, all my problems will be solved, right?
Yep.
And it's that fantasy that they're engaging in that is actually taking away the pain, not the actual making the bet, right? I
Right.
mean, that is part of it, but
Yeah.
it's the fantasy. And the same with sex. If I'm thinking about what sex I'm going to have, or maybe this is going to be the sexual moment that is going to be the most powerful for me, whatever, right? It's
Yep.
like I don't have to deal with my life. I
Yeah.
don't have to deal with my pain. I don't have to deal with my hurt, disappointment, sadness, and ultimately, like what you said earlier, that deep hole in the soul, that deep loneliness. Because if we're engaging in addiction, we're not connecting because we're
Right.
disconnected from ourselves, right? And if we're disconnected from ourselves, we can't connect with others, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
it's that whole thing, and in some ways it's different in the sense that in some ways sex addiction can be hidden easier, right? So it can go
Right.
on a lot longer. When you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, it can be harder to hide it, though many people are very successful at that.
Mhm.
But with sex addiction, it can be hidden for a long time,
Mhm.
right? And then of course there's a lot of other consequences with that come along as well. So
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like thinking about when we're talking about sex addiction, and I'm thinking about relationships. And how do you begin to rebuild when there's either been this massive tragic event that has altered the course of your life forever, perhaps, or at least put a marker there that will never go away? And then like sex addiction, where trust might be completely demolished and violated to the point where it's like beyond repair. How do you take those basic steps to maintain teamwork with a partner? So I guess I'm moving on to like if you
Yeah.
were in a sex addiction and you were with either a partner or a spouse.
hmm I think, when I look at the really, like when we put those two together on a really broad sense, it's
Right.
a lot of patience, a lot of compassion for yourself and the other, right? Really trying to manifest that as best you can, right? And once again, that goes right back to mindfulness too, right?
Right,
Using
right,
your mindful tools to create that state so that you can start to show up, and then you can start to get the skills to walk through it together, and that everybody's going to walk through it differently, right?
right.
One of the things that both my wife and I had to do is really realize that our griefs were different. A mother and a father's grief are very, very different. There's different things there, and we grieved it very differently, right? And we had to make room for that. And that was a learning process, right? So it really showed us that we all go through this process in different ways. But I think it was the patience and the compassion that got us through some of those difficult times. Now, not all those times were easy. I don't want to say like we just did it and we're compassionate, like sometimes it wasn't, it didn't work. There was a lot of conflict around that. We didn't know how to handle it.
Sure.
I'm trying as a father, I'm trying to rescue her and get her into support. And yet I'm ignoring myself. And,
Right.
it's just like, and all the grief that comes with a father. And, it
Right.
just kind of gets all, there's a lot going on. And so with that said, when you look at like someone who is in a relationship with like betrayal trauma,
Yeah.
there also has to be that patience and compassion. But what I would say with sex addiction, where you have to really, really be aware of, is that the person who's been betrayed by the person who has that deceptive sexuality or
Mhm.
secret, that secret sexuality, there's also a lot of behaviors that go along with that are abusive to the person that information is being held from,
Mm.
right? So if you're in a relationship with someone who has this secret sexuality, right? You don't know what's going on. So the person who's hiding that, and this can also be for addiction too, not just sex addiction,
Sure.
but there's a lot of abuse going on. There's gaslighting, there's lying, there's minimizing, there's crazy making, because the partner who usually has a sense that something's going on, like,
Yeah. Something's
like
off.
yeah, something's off, it's not quite working. Like, what's going on? And the person who's hiding their sexuality is going, oh, I think it's your fault,
Right.
right? No, I don't know what you're
I don't
talking
know what you're
about.
talking about. Yeah.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So I think with sex addiction, we have to look at that component of looking at that integrity abuse part of it, right? Of keeping
Mhm.
that secret sexuality. And that has a huge impact on the person who's been betrayed, right? So it's not just the betrayal itself, it's all the behaviors that kept that secret from the betrayed partner that we have to look at, and often gets ignored and doesn't get seen. So I think that's really, really important. And then I'd say to the person who's done the betrayal, if they really want to heal the relationship, and many do, right? Many who are caught up in sex addiction really have deep remorse, right?
Mm.
With any addiction. I mean, you love the people around you, yet you're engaging in this behavior that's so destructive to them, right? And so they really do want to get better. So what they really have to do in this situation specifically, and people can find, they want the details of this, they can go to helpingcouplesheal.com and get the podcast and really get into the details. But I'm speaking very broadly
Yeah.
and succinctly, is that they really have to go first, meaning they have to put themselves, if they've done the betrayal, they have to put themselves aside and be there for their partner, and then heal themselves, and also take responsibility for the impact this has, and their own behavior. If it is abusive in the sense of, they're gaslighting and lying, they have to own that piece as well. right? And they have to go first. And that's probably, they have to go first for quite a while, right? Maybe a year, maybe 2 years, while their partner repairs. And then, and they can earn back trust,
Hmm.
right? And we have like a formula for that we say is like, it's consistent, noticeable, trustworthy behaviors over time equals what I call earned trust. It's not the same trust you give somebody when you're just in a relationship. It's earned trust,
Hmm.
but it can be very it can be very, very good and rewarding if they're willing to do that and to do that work. But it has to be, once again, well, we go right back to when we are first starting, actionable items, right?
Hmm.
Noticeable behaviors,
Yeah.
right? Noticeable, actionable items, right? So a person who's done the betrayal, they have to be an open book for a long time. Like, it's like, you know what? You can't trust me. I lied to you. You know what? You have access to my cell phone. You have access to my computer. You have access to my bank accounts because how can you trust me? You can't. I lied to you for, unfortunately, I see this all the time. I lied to you for 30 years of our marriage.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's devastating, you
Yeah.
know, when that comes out. So hard.
Yeah. I have a friend, part of their process was they had to, at the very end, it was the male in a marriage relationship between a male and a female, and he had to take a polygraph test after sharing
Yeah.
everything. And I was like, wait, what? Whoa, why is that?
What's that?
And
What's that?
yeah,
Yeah.
and he said, yeah, it's just part of, me making sure that I haven't sort of left anything out so that she could know that there was nothing left, like she knew
This
everything
is
now.
everything.
And
Yeah.
I thought, oh, that's intense. Sounds intense, but sounds pretty
It's
powerful.
it is very intense. So, and we call that like a disclosure, like a formal disclosure.
Closure.
So because there's all the secrets, right? The person who's been betrayed doesn't know what's real anymore.
Mm,
Right? They don't know. Their whole sense of the world has been shattered,
hmm.
right? Into pieces. And so they can't make sense of everything anymore. Right? So they don't know what the truth is. So the
Yeah.
person, if they really want to repair it, and the person who's done the deception, they have to first put everything out on the table. And that's
Mhm.
done with some discernment about what specifically that is and how much detail and all that kind of stuff. You want to get some professional guidance on that. But then, a lot of times what we will do sometimes is we will say, before they do that disclosure of everything, we'll say, do a polygraph. And they're looking, are you actively trying to be deceptive in your disclosure? Right?
Mhm.
They're testing for that. Now, polygraphs aren't 100% perfect, right? We know that they're not,
Right.
they're not allowed in a court of law, so they're not perfect tools, but they're one tool that a partner might want because it'll help them feel
Yeah.
safer, and that all the truth is out there. And that then together, it gives the partner the ability to make the decision. Now, with all that information,
Yeah.
do I actually want to be in this relationship? Before, in a way, consent's taken from them, right? Because they don't have all the you can't consent to a relationship if you don't have all the information,
Oh,
right? So
good.
they have all the information.
Hmm.
Now they can decide if they want to stay, if they choose to stay, and most do, right? They both have a shared starting place, a shared reality that they can start to grow from, right? This is the best of my memory is, right?
Yeah.
And I've shared it with you.
Yeah.
You can decide to stay with me or not. And now we can build from that. What I find, you know, and this is, I have to say this is generally how it goes. Everybody's different. Some partners I work with don't want a disclosure. They're okay with that. And that each partner has to make that decision themselves. But these are the tools that are available if they want that. Right. And so they can build from that. And it's a long haul. It's not easy. But I do see relationships come to the other side, and it's also pretty amazing because the other person, if they've done the betrayal and they have all that their own trauma in their past and all their stuff, they have to heal their stuff, right, to come to
Yeah.
the relationship honestly. So they get healed, then the partner gets healed, and then they heal together.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is a long haul and it's a lot of work, but it's worth
Oh,
it.
that's amazing and incredible. And it reminds me of that quote that I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something to do with, I'll take care of me for you, right? And so the whole
Yeah.
idea of cleaning up my side of the street, doing the work that I need to do so that I can be, my best self, bring the best version of myself for to the table to be with my partner or spouse or in
Hmm.
any relationship, really, because it's that once that kind of selfishness creeps in, I'm speaking for myself, where it's like, well, you're not grieving in the way that I think you should grieve because this is the
Right.
way that I grieve. So why are you not grieving the same way? Or, you've betrayed my trust, and I can think of things that happened way early in our marriage that I'm way too mature and way too past, like in terms of I should never bring those up again, but they'll still pop into my head and I'll still think, oh, yeah, that time at McDonald's when, you didn't get me the
Yeah.
right shake and you did it on purpose or, I'll have these weird things that fly into my head and just taking responsibility for those things and not, um, bringing up old crap or things that I'm responsible for now. Like that's my
Right. Yeah.
entirely. And these are just such powerful topics that really, I think, you know, help us to realize that um, the way to have that mindful space of peace, right, is to making these decisions that sow towards that, like SOW,
Right.
sow towards, having peace of mind means I have to act in ways that support that peace of mind. And
Right.
I can't just be like, oh, well, we've been married 24 years and I'm comfortable with you. So I'm just going to sling some mud at you because I feel like it. You know what I
Right.
mean? And like,
Well, yeah, it's a constant journey. I mean, I
yeah,
know that. It's like we're constantly working to if you're in a relationship, it's constant maintenance. I mean, you got to constantly work on it. And we're growing and changing as we get older. Things that were meaningful to us, 10 years ago are not meaningful to us anymore. And now this has changed with us. And we have
yeah,
to constantly navigate all those changes. And yeah, I think we have an obligation to be our best selves for our partner if we're in a relationship. And you know we gotta work on that and
yeah,
hopefully both people are doing that for each other.
yeah. Well, that's huge. And all of this has been huge for me. And I feel like I'm going to walk away from this conversation and it's going to take me like the rest of the afternoon to just kind of even let it soak in and like process and digest it. So thank you so much for giving us so much rich and valuable um, stuff to think about. I mean, these are just like gold nuggets that we can just keep on our minds and in our hearts and keep letting them speak to us and educate us. So this has just been a huge, huge episode for me personally. And as we wrap up, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to quickly ask you about self forgiveness and just the importance of that. Because I think sometimes, at least for me, I'll get locked in my own head about I'll be wearing some kind of scarlet letter of sorts and I'm not
Hmm.
even conscious of this, by the way. It's just that I'll find that I'm stuck in a pattern of like, oh, well, I deserve this kind of not really even thinking, but it'll just be a mindset that I've kind of
Hmm.
developed like, oh, well, this is just me. And it's like, how do we get to that spot? What are some, I guess, active steps that we could take to work on self-forgiveness?
I think that's a great question. I think as I've looked at that process through my life, i've I've moved more to thinking about self-forgiveness through the lens of self-compassion,
Oh, so
right?
good.
And being compassionate to myself. And I think if you've had trauma in your life, And I don't think we get called to this work if we don't have trauma in our life, right? I mean, it's just gotta like we gotta do it. But you can be so hard on yourself and so judgmental of yourself. And I know I've been there and I still do that. I still try and I have to practice self-compassion, right? And I think that leads to self-forgiveness, if that makes sense. I think that's the starting place. It's just being compassionate, realizing your humanity, realizing like what it means to be human, fully human. And that means ups and downs and, weird emotions and crazy thoughts and, bad decisions and being kind to ourselves as we walk through that process, and I think for me, that's how I kind of look at it.
So good. Oh my goodness. Thank you so, so much for that. Yeah, just
You're
the
welcome.
importance of all of that and to know that, it's the whole Ram Dass. We're all just walking each other home. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that statement. I love that. That's it.
Duane, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. Keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.